rocket ships will take off, whether you're in them or not. And it's sad, but it's the truth. The world will still turn without you.
Welcome to God is Open. I am your host, Christopher Fisher. On today's episode of God is Open, we're going to be responding to this Pine Creek individual. He's an atheist, and he styles himself as some grand anti-Christian type guy, something like that. And he has this video. It says, "Open theism won't help you." And someone asked me to review and respond to that, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Here's my history with this Pine Creek fellow. Apparently, it's popular to respond to this guy nowadays. I don't know why. I've watched maybe an hour or two of his material, and it's very insufferable. It's insufferable because it's like emotional soup. And so you're watching it, and he doesn't actually make arguments. It's all this theoretical, like, oh, if there was baby Hitler, would you kill baby Hitler? And then your answer is supposed to mean something about reality or something like that. So I think I finally put my finger on what's so insufferable about this guy is it's a very low stability material, and his audience seems very low stability as well, which is interesting. So I went ahead and I just did a little bit of prima facie, just face value type of research on if atheism correlates to neuroticism, low stability. If being a female does, women tend to trend higher in neuroticism. Those on the left, those who are socialists, tend to trend higher in neuroticism. And guess what? Those who are atheists also tend to trend high in neuroticism. The emotional instability, these are emotionally unstable arguments he tends to make, which for me, it's like, why am I even? You're not making an argument. Can you make an argument? I don't need this emotional, emoting. You don't want any of that. So let's go to this study here, and it says overall neuroticism. Now this is surveying multiple studies. Overall, neuroticism is not found to relate to religiosity. However, when significant results were obtained, 7 studies, in all but one of the cases, religiosity was associated with lower neuroticism. Clergy in 4 of the 5 studies, as well as religious people in comparison with non-religious, and people with higher charismatic experience, were reported to be more emotionally stable. A study by Dune, Martin, Pangan, and Heath revealed an interesting phenomenon. Church attendees were more emotionally stable, and those who, after 8 years in a follow-up study, reported that they had stopped going to church were found to be higher in neuroticism. Neuroticism trends among atheists, so that's probably why their arguments tend to not be actual real arguments. It's not about evidence and truth and what's real. It's about what feels good. If God was this way, that would be bad. That's not an argument. That is not an argument. I got another little study pulled up, and this is 2012. I think it's a little bit newer than the other one, but this used individuals from a university, and so it's an Islamic university, and they're sampled, and it was actually pretty high, a high correlation between neuroticism and atheism. It says data showed that basic religious beliefs have a significant negative correlation with neuroticism. R equals 0.29. And a significant positive relationship with extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. So it's low stability. I don't like low stability arguments, and so I'm not quite impressed by this individual. And we'll see what we're talking about here, because in this very video, he tries to do that. He's like throwing out little theoreticals. I think I've watched this video like once a long time ago. But I also found this lady that's in this is like a girl. She's like 18, so she's like, I don't know if she's 18 or not, but she's pretty young. Sometimes people need to mature before they go on camera. I don't know if she's quite there yet. So let's hear this exchange and see what he says, and then see, number one, is it an argument? Probably not an argument. I pretty much guarantee it's not an argument at the onset. So let's go ahead.
I don't know if you do you have kids?
I'm 20. I have no children.
Yeah, I didn't want to assume.
I view her as my child.
But John threw out like that 15%. God is sometimes wrong about what he predicts 15% of the time. But let's say that's right. Let's say that's close.
So that would be John Singleton, who's an open theist street preacher. I think he is. I have had some interaction with him in the past. He seems like a good guy, and he seems like he knows his stuff. I don't know. I haven't talked to him or anything anytime lately. But so John Singleton said God's wrong 15%. I don't know why. So this Pine Creek guy thinks these numbers are significant and they're meaningful, and apparently they change reality based on whatever the numbers are that you think.
If you're about to be a mother and you knew that there's an 85% chance that your child would have the most atrocious, heinous, exceedingly bad health condition, and from the moment it's born to the moment it dies, it's nothing but pain, would you choose to have that child?
I don't know if it's necessarily up to us to decide that.
No, I'm asking you, like, you get to decide it. I'm not talking about abortion. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about...
No, yeah.
So what's his goal with this question? Just think about his mentality. What would the answer prove any which way that, let's say that I would have that baby, and then the baby does get that disease, and the baby suffers a terrible life. Oh, now I'm terrible. Now I'm a horrible person, and then what? Does that mean that event never happened? In the theoretical, it happened, right? So this is not about belief in God. It might be belief in, I don't know, theoretical characteristics in a theoretical situation applied to God. It'd be like, would you kill baby Hitler? And you're like, well, I don't want to kill a baby, but he's a Hitler. You would have saved all these lives. He was a terrible person, but it's a baby. It's a kind of just a nonsense theoretical that's not plausible. And it's not a situation anyone's going to encounter, really. I guess you would encounter that in maybe a fixed deterministic type of future when Hitler must be that individual. Like Calvinist James White said that if you save a baby from a fire, how did you know that that wasn't baby Hitler? Yeah, if it was baby Hitler, you just let the baby burn to death. Baby Hitler burn to death. That's what you do, apparently, if you're James White. But I don't see how this links to reality. Whatever the answer is, Calvinists like to do this almost exclusively, these moralistic arguments. If God was like this, then this. If God didn't know the future, then we can't be assured of our salvation. It's like, what kind of low stability nonsense is that? I'm not saying that Calvinists are low in neuroticism. Or high in neuroticism. If I were to guess, I would guess that Calvinists are fairly low in neuroticism, but that aspect in itself that, like, what, we can't be assured of something, it's very low stability. It's not manly. It's a very feminine trait coming from people who like to style themselves as a little bit manly. Grow up, become more stable, more mentally stable, and let's focus on what is. What is more important than the niceness of the real world. You know what's not nice is Soviet Russia imprisoning people in gulags and torturing them and starving them to death, and people having to eat their kids through cannibalism during the kulak starvation that Stalin implemented. Reality tends not to be nice, but we don't accept or reject reality based on whatever feelings it makes us feel. Reality is not optional. We don't get to pick reality. And so these low stability questions, what are you getting at? What's your purpose? Why are you bringing these up? Why do you care about this subject rather than the subject of reality? Are you a Christian fighter, or are you just trying to go around saying, you believe in a God who I don't like? Like Pine Creek, he always goes around saying, well, Jesus drowned babies in the flood. As if, okay, is that an argument? What's your argument? What are you getting at? Am I supposed to be like, oh no, Christianity's terrible, and now Christianity's not true because this thing is terrible according to you? I guess I don't know what's going on here. If I gave you an envelope and it said in that envelope, if you conceive tonight, if you have actually any children, an 85% probability that, think of the most severe suffering that a human being can go through every second of every day of their life,
would you have children? 85% chance. I wouldn't.
I don't know why, but I'm leaning towards I would. I just feel like...
But wouldn't that be immoral of you to risk that amount of pain and suffering on someone that you could choose not to have that happen?
Not necessarily. Humanity, for since time eternal, since all of human history has been misery, pain, suffering. One historian I was reading said that meat used to be sold in the market with very little pretense that it wasn't human meat. Cannibalism has been the common denominator throughout human history because people have just starved to death wherever and whenever. And guess what? Most everyone throughout history have always opted to have children, even though life has been brutish, tough, and short. Thomas Hobbes, that life is brutish and short. This is our history of humanity, yet people continue on anyways. People want the human race to survive. People want to live. Even people in pain quite often want to live. They say, I didn't want to be aborted. Thank you, Mom, for having me, is a typical reaction. You don't typically get the reverse of that. And notice it's all hypothetical, and it's all about this very specific little setup that he's doing. It doesn't have correlation to reality.
It's an interesting concept. I feel like I wouldn't want to not give... Like, I feel like if God wants me to have a child, like...
This is your decision.
Awkward pauses, so I'm just going to kind of fill the dead air here real quick. So, just what is his point here? What's his purpose? How does this have anything to do with anything rather than some sort of emotional outpouring to his audience? And his audience I guarantee it. Should we scroll down and take a look at what they're doing? It's like, oh man, okay, you could go anywhere, blah blah blah. You tried your best, Doug. Oh wow, Doug, this is your best. Fantastic. Let's see, moral conclusions. Oh, moral conclusions are sidestepped. Oh man, you are so great. What an intellectual we got here that is exploring the moral situations of theism as if that has any impact on reality. All right, let's hear.
I wouldn't want them to suffer.
What if it was 99%? Would that change anything? Did the percentages change anything for you?
So notice these are all value judgments. It's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. This is Pine Creek. He says in a different video when he was reviewing the Pritchett video about him, I wouldn't want to live forever with my wife. It's like, I wouldn't mind living with my wife and my kids forever. I guess that's a different value judgment that we're having here. That doesn't make him wrong and and me right. That has they're value judgments. So his question to her is about a value judgment. Does that mean her answer is going to determine reality? That now, let's say God is willing to have people at a 99% probability that they're going to suffer for all eternity. Now God's evil for some reason, just because someone else, her for some reason, wouldn't do that. Is that the game we're playing? A subjective evaluation? Where does that get us? What does that do for us? It's just this weird hypothetical with no grounding in reality.
It reminds me of the Haunting of Hill House, where the mom's talking about how the children will go through so much pain and suffering and horribleness if they grow up, and she tries to kill them. Sorry, spoiler. And the kind of the moral of that, like the takeaway was like, yes, they will go through suffering. That will happen, no matter what. But they should still be given the chance to experience things. And I feel like that is where I would have to land on that, is that they still deserve the opportunity to.
But are you saying this because I'm linking this to Yahweh and creation? Like if we didn't know anything about God or whatever, and I just asked you human to human.
No, I still think that. But also just based on the the haunting of Hill House example, because that has nothing to do with God. Yeah, I'm leaving it there.
Okay. See, this is the reason why I'm asking this question is because I think John adopts open theism to avoid the problem I just presented to you.
Oh, that's the only conceivable reason anyone would adopt open theism. I don't know about that. I hope John jumps in here and contradicts them and says, no, that's you may be projecting your own value set on me that has no basis in reality. It's like, oh, one day I'm sitting around and it's like, wow, I'm a closed theist. I think God knows the future. But wait, that means he knew about the Holocaust. Oh, if God knew about the Holocaust, he would have never made the world. Oh, man. So I need to find a theological system that fits that idea where he doesn't know about the Holocaust. What's available? Let's grab some other book that's different than the Bible. Notice Pine Creek's mindset is, does he have any idea? He's supposed to be an atheist. These atheists pride themselves in being well-read and well-studied, and they don't seem to understand that open theism is the default belief of the Bible. That's what the text supports. Secular scholars like Christine Hayes of Yale University will state exactly what open theists state the Bible says. And so projecting these motivations, the motivations, the value set that he cares about onto who he's criticizing, oh man, this is definitely projection. Also a sign of low stability, high neuroticism, low stability.
And the problem is, if God knows for sure what's going to happen, it makes him look terrible because he's created something.
It's funny, in the Bible, God is actually concerned about his image, and so that's one of the reasons, that is the reason actually given in Exodus 32, why he doesn't kill all of Israel in the desert, is because it would make him look bad. And so Yahweh in the Bible tries to avoid bad PR, but I guess it doesn't work because this Pine Creek guy, he finds a problem with God flooding the world or something that all the rest of the Christianity doesn't. Up until Judaism, you find some criticisms of the flood in the Talmud, in Jewish writings, of Jewish recollections of, or commentary on the Old Testament. Oh God, why did you flood the world? Some criticisms of that sort, but that doesn't arise till thousands of years later. And well after the time of Jesus is when these criticisms of the flood arise.
Knowing exactly what will happen and decided to do it anyhow. And a lot of these things that are going to happen goes against his nature. God does not like sin. He doesn't want sin. Yet he created something that he knew would create sin.
So one thing about that is God didn't want sin. He didn't want a sinful world. Per the Bible, we're talking about the Bible now, so we're not going to float off in our own theology. What happens is that he realizes how wicked the world's become, and then he decides to destroy it. But then there's another reverse of fortune where he decides not to destroy it after all, and he allows it to repopulate. And then he reevaluates his standards and lowers his standards for humankind based on his understanding of human nature, what humans are prone to do, what they're going to do in his creation. So a lowering of standards, how is that going to figure into this conversation? I'm gonna go out on a limb here. It's not gonna factor into this conversation with any of the participants.
So, but John pulls back on that and says, no, he didn't know it would create sin, but he predicted 85% chance that it would create sin.
I feel like in that sense, because it's different than the example with the child suffering, because
it doesn't seem like God was expecting sin. He sees the world, he becomes sorry, and he has this deep longing regret in his being, and then he reverses his own course of action. I created these people, I repent of my own creation. It doesn't seem like there's an 85% chance he thought mankind would fall into oblivion as anything like that. I don't know, are these numbers Singleton's making up?
The child wouldn't be choosing to have that suffering inflicted on them, but Satan chose to have that evil
Did
occur.
Satan ask to be created?
No, I'm saying when he made the choice to rebel against God, like that was his choice, whereas a child being in pain wouldn't be their choice.
Watch for any arguments. Arguments are not that is not the moralistic fallacy. The moralistic fallacy is when you're trying to determine the truth of something based on how it makes you feel inside. It's like, oh, that doesn't make me feel very well. That would make God bad if God did X, Y, Z. Well, no, what you're left with is maybe God doesn't meet your standard of whatever your projection of goodness, and that might in fact be reality. You don't get to control reality. Our good intentions, our good emotions don't affect reality. It's low stability argumentation. For a low stability audience, as we kind of see here.
Choice. But as God, like if you're saying for Satan existing, right? I know. I feel like with Satan existing, God gave him a chance to exist. Like God could have said, like, I didn't create anything because I just knew it would go wrong. Like a teacher could say, like, I'm not going to let any of you take the test because I just know you're all going to cheat. I just know it. But if you don't like give them the opportunity to at least have a chance to prove themselves, then that's tyranny.
But Alexandra, we're talking about eternal damnation.
He gave Satan a chance, and Satan chose to ruin it.
I understand, but we're talking about eternal damnation here for some people, right? So if God saw with an 85% chance, as John said, that by creating, some people will end up in hell sometime in the future forever. And if God's not needy, if he doesn't need to create, in other words, if he has free will and he can choose not to create, if he's totally self-sufficient, why create?
I mean, he didn't necessarily specifically damn anyone to hell. It's everyone's choice whether or not to believe.
This is a little bit of a conflation of a few issues. So the Calvinist model of God is that God can't acquire things from outside himself. And so he can't acquire a need that needs to be fulfilled. He can't acquire something greater than he is. And so a relationship doesn't really benefit God at all. Whereas in the biblical model, it looks like God created for relationship. Of course, God's first act to Adam is to bring the animals to Adam to see what he's going to call them. It's a very curious thing. Like you have a kid, you have a baby, and you watch that baby grow up and you watch that baby develop. And you're like, what's this baby going to do here in this situation? Or you might, maybe there's a stain on the carpet over here and I start scrubbing it and I hand my little scrubber to my baby to see what she does. And then she copies me and there's a sense of innocence. There's a sense of relationship. We're bonding, in fact, in that. And there's a lot of joy that I gain out of this relationship. This is the biblical picture of God, a Yahweh who sings over us, rather than this stoic, God can't gain from us. In Calvinism, creation doesn't add to God's glory, but reflects God's glory. So it doesn't give anything to him, but it maximizes his apparent glory that doesn't get attributed onto him to make him more gloried, if that makes sense, because God can't gain from outside himself. This is not a biblical notion. Like in the Bible, King David says, if I die, if I go down to the grave where there's silence, King David might have been a believer in the shades where you go down and you might be mute, or you might not be able to have actions, or might not be consciousness. There's silence in the grave, and then God has to forego his glory. God's not being praised if David dies, and so God's going to forego that praise if he's going to allow David to his fate without saving David. David's argument is you can gain from keeping me alive, God. It's the biblical argument. But anyways, let's go back to his point. There's a conflation of a few items, and then he's rolling it all into one.
Believe in him,
but he created. Let me.
It's not like he forced anyone into anything.
I'm going to say something now, and I think every theist in here is going to agree with. And that is, if God chose not to create, there would be no sin, no evil, no pain, and no suffering.
And apparently that was his outro. We don't get a response from anyone else. And, oh, that's the gotcha. So God apparently is the source of sin. Terence Fretheim got up at the Society of Biblical Literature, and Fretheim, he's an open theist, and he is talking to an open theist, and the open theist he's talking to had a model of God in which God could not sin. God is incapable of sinning. And Fretheim's response was that in the act of creation, in the act of just being our creator, he bears some culpability for what happens on earth. He can't dissolve himself of all the blame. In some respects, he's blamed for this sin. And we really see this in the Bible. In the Bible, God takes it upon himself. He blames himself for man's condition. He blames his own action in creation for the fallen state of man. In Genesis 6, he regrets his own act of creation. This is God taking culpability on himself. I created this, and this has failed. I've got to undo what I have done. It's taking responsibility. So Pine Creek's gotcha. It's not a real gotcha. It's not an argument. God has some sort of culpability, apparently, and that's the big open theism won't help you because God gets a little bit of culpability, and then we do what with that? What do we do? That now God doesn't exist. So let's say we have a universe, and God exists, and that's Yahweh of the Bible, just for sake of argument. And then he also does a sin. Like let's say he cheats on a card game. He's playing against King David, cheats on the card game, sins against King David, violates that relationship. What now? Does he not exist? But the theoretical already had him existing. What's your point, Pine Creek? You don't have a point. It's a low stability argument for a low stability audience. It's a low stability man. It's high neuroticism. High neuroticism is what's going on here. So in summary of this video, Pine Creek's mentality is that open theism won't help you because we're harmed somehow if God's attributed any culpability for any wrongs in this world, and that's apparently a big issue. It's not an issue for me. I don't see how that is an issue. If I have a kid, regardless if I know the future or not, I'm somewhat responsible for their actions. I'm culpable in some sense for the person that they turn out to be, regardless if it turns out that they primarily did everything on their own to turn out the way they are on their own, and I did a ton of things. I did everything I can to make them right, make them whole. I still do bear some culpability in that they are my children for having created them, for having raised them. I am culpable in some respect, in some sense, for their actions. That doesn't mean I don't exist. My existence is not dependent on my culpability. So in short, the moralistic argument is not high in stability, it's high in neuroticism. It's not a rational argument. It's a very feminine argument made by very unmasculine individuals and cheered on by effeminate supporters who don't think in rationality. Neuroticism trends among the non-religious. But even notice from this video, though, that these things are value judgments. They're value calls. And even the girl in this video undermines his very point by saying that she would have kids at the 99th percentile of chance that they're going to live some terrible, terrible existence, horrid or whatever. She would still take that chance. It's a value judgment. That doesn't mean she's wrong. That doesn't mean she's evil. I'm not going to call her out and say, you're such a terrible person for that. I don't know anything like that. So his argument just kind of falls apart on the face of it. Reality is just not whatever we want it to be. Reality is not whatever makes us feel good inside. Reality is not optional. Anyways, that's probably long enough on this guy. If you have any comments or questions, throw that below. Maybe I'm totally misrepresenting this guy's mentality and argument. If you think I am, tell me about it. I don't think I am. I've watched enough to this guy to know his mentality and how he thinks, and it's not quite there. It's not quite at the rationality stage. It's kind of virtue signaling to his audience for some sort of witch hunt or 5 minutes of hate is a pretty good description of these atheist channels. They're not actually looking for rational discussion about rational issues. They're looking for their 5 minutes of self-congratulation and high fives among each other. High five, high five, high five. 5 minutes of hate against their Christian de jure. It's I'm sorry. It's not for me. Not for me.